I caught my wife with my father and brother, then took ultimate revenge, returning home early from a business trip. I spotted my father's car in the driveway. It wasn't unusual. He often checked in on Sonia, my wife of 9 years, while I was away. But when I opened the front door, the sounds from the bedroom told a different story. Curiosity turned into dread. Grabbing the lockbox from my desk, I retrieved the Colt I kept for emergencies and tucked it into my waistband. With my phone camera ready, I headed toward the source of the noise. There they were, Sonia, my father, and my brother David. The betrayal burned into my mind as I snapped 7 incriminating photos. "Give me that camera," David roared, leaping off the bed. I didn't flinch. Reaching behind me, I pulled out the Colt. David sneered, "You don't have the guts." The next moment, he was on the floor, screaming. "My God," my father exclaimed. "You did that to your own brother," I replied coldly. "The only reason I'm not doing worse to you is so Mom can have the pleasure of dealing with you herself." Sonia sobbed, pleading, "Don't do this, please." Ignoring her, I fixed my father with a glare. "I don't know what disgusts me more, your betrayal or the fact that you're doing things with her that she'd never do with me. But don't worry, I'll handle it my way." Turning to leave, I added, "Oh, and you might want to change the sign on the building from Dawson and Sons to Dawson and Son. Actually, maybe just Dawson, assuming David doesn't bleed out." As I walked out, my father shouted after me, "Bobby, come back. Let's talk." I didn't. Instead, I punctured 2 of his car tires to ensure he couldn't get to Mom before I did. Driving 2 blocks away, I pulled over and called her. "Mom," I said, "I'm sending you some photos you need to see before Dad gets home." Her questions came rapid fire, but I cut her off, promising to call back later. At the bank, I emptied our accounts, Sania's and mine, and cashed out $118,000. I then withdrew $155,000 from the company's accounts. Severance pay, I called it. Others might call it embezzlement, but at that point, I didn't care. Before leaving town, I made one last call to David's wife, Cindy. "Bob, what's going on?" "Your dad called, saying you shot David." "I caught him in bed with Sonia," I said bluntly. "I'm emailing you the pictures." Silence. Then a shaky, "Thanks for telling me." I hung up and drove out of town, determined to leave Michigan behind. 2 days later, I reached Colorado and checked into a motel outside Denver. Using a disposable phone, I called my mom. "Bob, you need to come back," she urged. "Your dad's out of the house, and the business is falling apart without you." "I'm not coming back, Mom. Not while they're there." "Your father cheated sometimes," she admitted. "But Sonia, I can't forgive that. I've started divorce proceedings, and the business is mine now. I'll need your help to run it. I'll think about it, I said, though I had no intention of returning anytime soon. On the road again, I stopped at a truck stop for gas and food. That's where I met Maggie, a young woman clearly struggling. She nervously approached me, offering a favor for $20 to buy food. I waved her off and invited her to eat instead. Over dinner, Maggie shared her story: an abusive stepfather, an addicted mother, and a desperate escape. She was heading to Houston to find her sister. Moved by her courage, I decided to help, offering her a ride. As we drove, Maggie asked about my story. I told her everything: catching my wife, my father, and my brother in bed together. Are you sure she wasn't being forced? Maggie asked. No, I said firmly. Her reaction told me everything. She wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant. Maggie shook her head. That's awful. What are you going to do now? Keep driving, I said, and figure it out along the way. For now, that's exactly what I'm doing, putting as much distance as I can between myself and the people who betrayed me. I still think you should find out why. Maybe someday, she said softly, but I'm not ready for that right now. We stopped at a roadside motel. I booked a room with 2 beds, but after her shower, Maggie climbed into mine. I don't want to be alone, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Her hand brushed against me, then started moving lower. I caught her wrist and stopped her. No, I said firmly. But I want to, she insisted, her eyes pleading. I owe you. You don't owe me anything, I replied. I didn't help you for that. She hesitated, then asked, what if I want to? Not to pay you back, but because I want to. Is that okay? I paused, conflicted. Maggie was beautiful, and I wasn't tied to Sonia anymore. Slowly, I released her wrist. That was all the permission she needed. We shared something that night, something we both needed, though for different reasons. The next morning, we grabbed a quick breakfast and hit the road again. As the hours passed, I realized I liked her, but I couldn't see a future together. When we stopped for the night around 9 p.m., I stayed in the car as she grabbed her things. Aren't you coming in? She asked, disappointment flickering in her eyes. I'd like to, I admitted, but I can't. I'm behind schedule and need to keep moving. She nodded, kissed me goodbye, and disappeared into the motel. I watched until the door shut behind her, then drove off to a nearby diner, my mind heavy with thoughts of her and what lay ahead. Half an hour outside Columbus, I spotted a car pulled over with a man and woman hitchhiking nearby. Against my better judgment, I stopped to help. The man introduced himself as Ray and climbed into the front seat, while the woman, Sarah, took the back. We hadn't gone far when Ray pulled a switchblade, his tone menacing. "Give me your cash and the car." Calmly, I reached for the 45 in my door pocket and pointed it at him. "I don't think so." Before I could act, Sarah looped her purse strap around Ray's neck and yanked. He struggled, but she tightened the grip until he went limp. I pulled over on a dirt road, took the knife, and dragged Ray's unconscious body out of the car. I checked his pulse, alive. Good. I stripped him down, rolled him into a ditch, and threw his clothes into the trunk. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed. "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" I smirked. "You helped me. Why would I?" She shrugged and climbed into the front seat. As we drove, I asked, "So, you weren't involved with him?" "I met him an hour ago. My car broke down, and he offered me a ride. Then he started demanding things. I planned to ditch him at the first gas station, but when he got aggressive, I had to act." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not just call for a tow?" "It wasn't my car," she admitted. "It was my husband's company car. I left him after catching him cheating." She went on to explain how she'd emptied their bank accounts and hit the road. "Now I'm heading to San Diego to stay with my family," she finished. "What about you?" I shared my own story, and she laughed. "What are the odds? We're both running from our pasts." We stopped in San Antonio to see the Alamo and the Riverwalk before planning the rest of the trip. Over the next 6 days, we drove to San Diego, sharing stories, laughs, and occasional silences. By the time we arrived, we'd grown closer than it expected. At her mother's house, she hesitated. "I'd invite you in, but my husband is here, trying to win me back." "Are you going to take him back?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I don't know. I love him, but," she sighed, "this whole mess is still too fresh." She handed me a slip of paper with her number. "In case you want to call me." I watched her walk away, torn between wanting to fight for her and knowing it wasn't my place. I drove off, checking into a motel nearby, unsure of what my next move would be. The next morning, I was jolted awake by shouting outside. Peeking through the window, I saw a man shove a woman to the ground before speeding off in his car. Without hesitation, I rushed out to help her. She was shaken but unharmed. "I'm stranded," she said, her voice trembling. "No money, nowhere to go." I offered her a ride. At first, she hesitated, but desperation won out. Her name was Mary, and like me, she was running from a failed marriage and a trail of broken trust. As we drove toward Minnesota, we shared pieces of ourselves. Her pain mirrored mine, but somehow the shared struggle felt comforting. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. "This trip is a fresh start," she said. I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. Maybe she was right. Stories in the dark that evening, as we stopped at a roadside inn, Mary surprised me with her honesty. Over a quiet dinner, she opened up about her ex-husband, Jake, and the betrayal that destroyed her marriage. He wasn't just unfaithful, she admitted, her voice cracking. He blamed me for it. He said, it was my fault he needed someone else. The words hung heavy in the air. I didn't press her further. I could see the pain etched into her face. We booked a twin bedroom, and despite her initial wariness, Mary insisted she trusted me. It felt like a small victory, a moment of connection in the midst of chaos. Unexpected confessions as the days passed. Mary's guarded walls began to crack. On our last night together, she asked if she could sleep beside me. Just for comfort, she said. I hesitated, unsure if I could trust myself, but I agreed, keeping a respectful distance. The next morning, she smiled at me with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. You're different, she said. I didn't think you'd actually keep your distance. We arrived in St. Paul later that day. Mary insisted on parting ways, saying, I need to focus on my divorce. But thank you for everything. New passengers, old wounds. I drove on to my next stop, Julia's house, to pick up her daughter, Jess. When I arrived, Jess greeted me alone. Mike's not coming, she said flatly. I broke up with him last night. He was cheating on me with Abby Fisk. Jess was calm, almost eerily composed, but I could see the pain beneath the surface. As we hit the road, she surprised me with a bold question. What did Aunt Mary say about you? What do you mean? I asked cautiously. She said, you're incredible in bed. I nearly slammed on the brakes. She what? Jess shrugged, smirking. I don't know if it's true, but after what I've been through, I'm curious. The tension was palpable. I tried to focus on the road, but her words lingered, threatening to unravel my self-control. Homecomings and confrontations. Eventually, I returned to face the storm waiting for me at home. My mother greeted me with her usual mix of disdain and misplaced concern. You need to talk to Sonia, she insisted. Sort this mess out. Why do you care so much? I snapped. After what she did with Dad, you should want her gone. She's still your wife, Rob. You need closure. Her words stirred something in me. That evening, I drove home. Sanaya's car was in the driveway. As I approached the door, it swung open. She stood there, tears streaming down her face. You're okay, she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. I was so worried. I froze, then pushed her away. Don't touch me. Her expression crumbled. I love you, Rob. Love me? I spat. You slept with my father and my brother. Don't insult me with your lies. The truth Unveiled, Sonia broke down, confessing a dark web of manipulation and betrayal. My father had blackmailed her with compromising photos, forcing her into unspeakable acts. I wanted to believe her, but the cracks in her story and her own guilty admissions made it impossible. Then the door burst open. David, my brother, staggered in, armed and enraged. "You ruined everything, Rob," he screamed. "Now I'll ruin you." He raised the gun. Before I could react, Sonia stepped between us. The gunshot echoed through the house. Sonia crumpled to the floor. In the aftermath, Sonia didn't survive. Her final act, a desperate bid to save me, left me reeling. David was arrested and sentenced, but justice felt hollow. My father's death brought no closure, only the bitter satisfaction of urinating on his grave. In the years that followed, I tried to rebuild. Relationships came and went, but nothing stuck. The scars of betrayal ran too deep. Some wounds never heal, but they fade. And in their place, I found something like peace. The road ahead remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: I survived. And for now, that's enough.